Welcome to America's Fractured Politics, everybody. Today I've got a special guest, and that is Marlon Weems. Marlon, great to have you.
Well, great to be here, Mark. Thanks for having
It's
me
my
on.
pleasure. I wanted to get to a few questions, and hopefully we can have a nice free-flowing conversation from it. I enjoy your work tremendously. I know a lot of people on Substack do as well, and this will be a lively conversation. So let me get started.
Sounds good.
You wrote about banks dumping money into white-owned businesses. How do we fix this?
Um, that's a good question. I don't know if I've got a good answer for that. Uh, Drill down just a little bit further on that for me.
Oh, I wanted you to talk a little bit about the phenomenon and, what sort of a policy, presumably a Democratic administration could undertake in order to make things better. Because it's very hard to get private sector people to send money where you want them to. They're going to send money where they want to send money. So I'm just thinking in terms
Right.
of incentives you could give them in order to start investing in minority communities.
You know, I tell you what, having worked on Wall Street, I've seen it work both ways. And, in terms of policy, and if we're talking about, for example, some of the policies that Kamala Harris had offered when she was running. And what I mean by that is, stimulation for businesses, startups, that sort of thing. I think those are the kind of things that would be helpful. But I just dropped a piece just earlier today talking about how um, the Democratic Party seems to be ignoring what their base
Mm,
wants. And I, that really, there was an article in the Journal, I think it was
mm,
yesterday. And just to lay it out, I forget the exact title, but essentially it was saying that progressives were raising tons of money, and of course AOC, I think she's raised about
yep.
$15.2 million, which is more or about as much as the DNC has in its that it's raised. So you got this one individual that's matching what the DNC's raising. She's raised more than anybody in the House. And from the way the journal portrayed it, that's a problem because Democratic leaders are trying to move the party in a different direction. But what it tells me is they're not listening to the people who they expect to
No,
vote
they're
for them.
not. I wrote a couple of pieces to that
And
effect too.
yeah, and so it's difficult for me to sort of get past that to even talk about solutions when we have, I guess, let's call it the establishment or whatever. But that core group that starts with from Nancy Pelosi to Hakeem Jeffries. I mean, all the
Yeah,
names, and they simply do not. I think they're stuck in the past, and they're fighting a war that maybe was 20 years ago, the right
yeah.
thing, but it's not where we are
No, it
today.
isn't.
So
It,
I just feel like it's difficult to get to the solution part until we have a recognition internally, if we're talking about Democrats, as to what the strategy ought
you're
to be.
right. The problem I see is that there's an iron triangle. The consultants who have made a lot of money off of this,
Yeah.
the old line Democratic Pauls, who you mentioned, some of them, who are wedded to this whole system and who are getting a ton of money from donors who have a very different agenda than the progressives do. And until you bust that
Hmm.
iron triangle, you're going to continue to see the same problems rise up again and again and again. Disconnect from what people want. Alexander Ocasio Cortez raising $15 million and Ken Martin not being able to match it. You and I'm sure we both get solicitations every day from DNC,
Oh yeah.
and I get a ton of them. And I frankly don't want to give them any money because I don't see anything coming
Well,
from that.
I think you're right, Mark. I think, and that one would think would illustrate the problem. When I was reading the numbers as I was writing the story, you're right on the money. Democratic fundraising, I forget exactly how much, but I think it's off like, 20 or 30% from where it was the last, election cycle. And they don't seem to be getting the message that the small dollar donors, which they see as a
Mm-hmm.
problem, are sending the message that we don't like what you're selling. We like what, as a matter of fact, I think out of the top 10, um, the top 10 fundraisers in the House, I want to say six of them are
They
progressives.
are. That's about right.
And in the top five, I think Hakeem Jeffries may be the only non-progressive that is, that's up there. So the voters are telling you what they want, but as you said, we've got a situation where they're listening to everybody but the people that they expect to vote for them. And then I think the other part of it is, the consultants that, however, whomever is convincing them of this, they've convinced themselves that they should chase this imaginary center
Mm-hmm.
that I do not believe
I
still
agree with you.
exists. They should, and if you look at independence, which is what the journal article that I reference in my piece mentions, that what they should be doing is, instead of giving AOC money, what donors should be doing is giving money to close races, right? And that way they will get independence. And my point of view is, if those races are close, and the example that they give is Marcy
Yeah.
Capture, which, nice lady. I've got nothing against her, but she's almost
Yeah.
80, number one. And I think the last race that she won by a point.
Mm-hmm.
So the way I see it, perhaps the reason the race is close is because she's the longest serving woman in
Yes, she
Congress
is.
in history. Maybe she's been there too long. Maybe people want something different. But rather than explore that, which I think is something that David Hogg tried to do when it got him ejected
Yeah.
from the DNC, rather than explore that possibility that maybe it's, and look, I'm an old guy too, so I'm not 80, but I'm not young, and I got nothing against folks just because of age. But it is something that we have to consider. I mean, we've got a younger base, and they're looking and they see all these people that simply aren't on the same wavelength with them. And so the example in the journal piece was comparing her and her fundraising, which was about 600,000 or so, to AOC, and they drew the conclusion, the journal, that the problem was progressivism. They didn't mention at all, or vaguely mentioned, age, but not much. And so I just think we're dodging a lot of the obvious issues.
The age issue is an interesting one. I mean, when it comes down to it, age ought not to be a determinant, but at the same time, it so happens to be the fact that a lot of the older members are really not doing a whole lot. They've slowed
Yeah.
down,
Look, if she's 80 and she's winning going away, I got no
but she's
problem
not.
with it. Um, and clearly she knows what she's doing. I assume she's been there a long
She's smart.
time. But then you just look at what happened in the case of Jerry Conley, and that gives you. I mean, and you know, I liked Jerry Conley, but the last go round, I think he probably should have stepped aside. And here we are. I think we've got three or four races where whomever was in that seat has either died or they're too sick to run again or whatever. And a lot of, I mean, you just can't ignore time. Time doesn't spare anybody.
No, it doesn't. I mean, what do you make of Mamdani's win, and what do you think it reckons? Uh, what do you think it does?
Now, the article that I keep referencing actually mentioned him too, and it spent a lot of time on him. Um, I just for, to keep it under 1,000 words, I just decided I was only going to focus really on the
Yeah.
House. But um, as I think Democrats are being exposed as hypocrites because, well, first of all, Andrew Cuomo. I mean,
He's a
seriously,
sex offender.
how how are we even? That was such a turnoff to me, and I really didn't pay a lot of attention. I used to live in New York for or in New York and around the area for quite a few years, and so I have a good idea of just politically how things are there. But to see someone like Kirsten Gillibrand, who ran Al Franken out of the doggone
Yeah.
Senate, to see her now supporting somebody like Cuomo, just I don't understand it. And I don't, again, you brought it up, the consultants. I simply don't understand. No one could convince me that that was a smart move. And so obviously there's a lot of money behind these guys, and I think in a lot of ways that's the real issue when you get down to it. But still, it's how do you come back from that? If you're Hakeem Jeffries, how do you explain to voters that a guy that has drawn, now look, it's a small sample size. I know it's a primary, but I don't think things are going to change that much. And it may be even more embarrassing just because of how Mamdani has been treated. Now, if you look at it, you've got him on the Democratic side, and you've got Eric Adams, who, by all rights probably ought to be in
Yeah.
prison or at least on trial. You got Andrew Cuomo, who just had to, I mean, a few years ago had to resign as governor. And then you've got, what, Curtis Sliwa and another independent. Even I just don't see how the guy loses. So let's say he wins. Now what?
You help him govern.
I mean, now what do
You help him govern is what
I'm
you help him
sorry?
govern is what you ought to do.
Yeah, I mean, you would think, but unless it's changed, I don't think have any of the prominent Democrats endorsed him. I don't
No,
think Hakeem Jeffries
no, Hakeem
has.
Jeffries is
I
not.
don't think any of the in-state, like in the Senate, I don't think any of them have. And some of the things that are being said are just, um, it's just Islamophobia
It
kind of
is
stuff, and it's
Islamophobia.
I have to be honest. I'm a little surprised by it, to be honest, and maybe I shouldn't be, but
I'm not. I
well, it's just
It
dumb,
is
though,
dumb. It's
isn't it?
very dumb. I will tell you, Hakeem has met with him once or twice. He's not endorsed him. He hasn't said he has any plans to endorse him. I think one of the problems is Hakeem is getting a lot of money from corporate PACs. I mean, he's getting money
Hmm.
from Northrop Grumman. He's getting over $1 million from APAC related PACs. I mean, they're putting a lot of pressure on him over Mamdani, and so he's in a tight
You
spot.
know, I saw some numbers, Mark, and I'm guessing here. It was right after the election in terms of the share of the vote that Mamdani got in Hakeem Jeffries' district. And you just wonder if I was talking to my wife about this last night because I had to look up the name, Eric
Yeah,
Cantor. You remember what happened to Eric
I do.
Cantor, where I think he was Speaker of the House at the
He was
time, and then
he was the
or
he
maybe minority,
he was a
minority or majority
he was a
leader, but he
majority
was
leader.
he was up
Yes, he
there,
was the
right?
majority leader.
And he got primaried by a guy nobody had ever
Yep,
heard of. And I just wonder um, if Hakeem Jeffries is opening himself up to
I
something
think
like
he
that.
is.
I don't know who the person would be that runs against him, but boy, you know, if all it takes is $1 million to make you behave in this way, you just wonder.
It does. Um, I think if somebody were to primary him, they could give him they could give him some real heartburn. I don't think it would be an easy race for him because if you look at the numbers, the ones you just cited, he did very well. Mamdani did in Hakeem Jeffries' district,
Yeah,
and that ought to be a wake up call for Hakeem Jeffries. But it doesn't seem to
you
be
would
doing
think.
it.
And look, we have gotten to a point politically that Democrats are so busy trying to, in my view, trying to um, please independents and Republicans that they don't really, and I say they, I consider myself a Democrat at least, for now, but they don't feel comfortable standing for, like I said, I mean, progressives are doing well for a reason. And I think we have gotten so accustomed to trying to be almost, what I call Republican light. We're just as pro gun as they are, but we're nicer, or we're just as um, law and order as they are, but, we're not as bad as Trump. And I think they've just really made a strategic error. And I can see, I'm from Arkansas, so Bill Clinton country. I remember, I'm old enough to remember when Bill Clinton was the head of the Democratic
Council.
Leadership
Yeah.
Council, I think
Yeah.
it was. And essentially, it was where Democrats who were afraid of being called liberal back then, that was a
That was their
pejorative.
refuge.
And and they were so concerned, and this is what got us the crime bill and quote unquote welfare reform and all of these
Yeah.
things. But it was us trying to beat Republicans at their own game instead of coming up with our own game and selling it. And I think maybe that made sense for some time, but nowadays there's a whole generation of people, and they just I'm talking about Gen Z, maybe Gen X to some degree, and they don't remember those days, and they don't understand why they're not being listened to.
I had a con.
So they stay
They
at
do.
home, or they vote third party, and that doesn't
No, it
help
doesn't.
us.
I had a conversation with a Democratic representative about 10 years ago, and I told him this: given a choice between a Republican and an ersatz Republican, somebody who's trying to run on a Republican light ticket, people are always going to pick the real Republican because that's just the way things are.
Yeah.
So, and he responded back. He said, "But we're not Republicans." I said, "You're acting like them. And if you act like them, then people are going to look at you and say, well, what do they stand for? We've already got Republicans. We can vote for them."
Well, that's the thing, and that's what mystifies me when I read articles like what I saw in the Journal yesterday, and they act surprised that Marcy Capture is in a race and she's only just a point or so. It's a toss up. Well, why buy the generic when you can get the original,
Right.
right? I mean, if you can't really tell the difference between somebody who says they're a Democrat and a Republican, like you said, well, why not just? I mean, so to me, it's the case for some radical change, and I use the word radical, not in the sense that it's extreme, but just dramatically different than what Democrats have been
Yeah.
doing. I think everybody knows, but the guys who should know, or the people who
Yeah.
should know.
Marcy Kaptur should not lose that seat. I mean, that's a working class district. And
Yeah.
people who I think are listening to the progressives are yearning for somebody who represents that district, who will actually talk the way AOC talks and the way people like AOC talk.
So do you think if a more progressive person were running in her district, they would do
Yeah, I
better?
do. I know that district, and they would be doing better.
Now, I don't know Ohio politics that well, but I just, sort of took the wide view, and I'm thinking, and it was almost as though in the effort to convince the reader that, progressive is the problem, I think inadvertently, at least to me, they were making an opposite argument because, they said, well, she's the longest serving woman in the House, and they were saying it was being presented like and it is a badge of
Yeah.
honor, but it's also the red flag to me that, oh wait, maybe folks are tired of whatever that is, that maybe they want something different or more representative. I don't know the demographics of the district, but probably not all 80-year-olds, you
No, I
know.
mean it's been gerrymandered to the point where now it's there are a lot of conservatives in the district, which is why she's probably doing so badly. But there's still a lot of working class people there who, if they came out to vote, could swamp them. And she's not
Yeah.
giving them any
Well, when you
incentive.
see AOC pulling 30,000 people in
Yeah.
Montana and Wyoming and Idaho, those are not those are not traditional progressive voters, let alone
She's not going to
Democrats.
go help
So,
Marcy Kaptur because Marcy Kaptur's not saying anything that AOC believes is going to move the needle. And that's a problem.
mm,
We've got a lot of people who
yeah.
need help, and
And
there's no reason to give them help.
why do you think? And I get the consultant argument, because we all, our money, we go where what butters our bread means
Yeah.
something, but it's just really baffling to me. I had really high hopes for Hakeem Jeffries. And I know, I mean, he was sort of Nancy Pelosi's pick and all of that, but the way he comes off, really a dynamic kind of guy. And I have to be honest, the way he's behaved, and I get that he's getting money from, certain PACs but on a certain level, you just want to see somebody rise above those kind of things,
Yeah.
right? And I'm probably being, I don't know if it's naive, maybe just idealistic or something, but uh, in this time, you would just think those guys would realize this is not the time for moderation. This is, we got to really swing the pendulum back forcefully in the opposite direction of where we are. And I just wonder why it is. I mean, you see it and I see it. Do you think they just don't see it, or they don't care, or
They
what
don't
do
they
you
don't
what
want
do
to
you
see it
think?
because it takes them out of their comfort zone. Their comfort zone is dealing with expensive lobbyists and dealing with corporations and dealing with people who have money. They've spent too much time around people with a lot of money. And it's very hard for
Mm.
them to depart from that paradigm because what ends up happening is they start talking like populists and the money starts disappearing. I mean, already they put tremendous pressure on the leadership and on Ken Martin over David Hogg. They said we don't need this guy coming out there and
Well,
causing
yeah,
trouble. And so they have their
yeah,
agenda, and right now they've got the Democratic Party captive.
yeah. I when Ben Wickler, I really had hoped
He'd
that
win.
Wickler, I guess from
Wisconsin. Yeah.
Wisconsin. I thought he did such a great job in Wisconsin that he was a shoe-in. But you can just sort of see the planets lining up,
Mhm.
or in this case, the the consultants or the money lining up, and you just look. I mean, they lost David Hogg, who now I'd like to know what you think about David Hogg. I saw him. He's an
He
exuberant
is.
guy.
He's a bit of a
Okay,
brat too.
I can see how he might have rubbed some people the
Yeah.
wrong way. Um, and I can even see the whole sort of conflict of him raising money and wanting to influence
Hmm.
races while also being in the DN. I mean, that's kind of what got us in trouble with the Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Where you don't want that organization putting their hand on the scale, right, or thumb or whatever. But I feel like there could have been a more diplomatic way to maybe have him step out of that role and find a different role for him that wouldn't have just alienated him in the way that I think it ended up.
I think he made it.
What do you
I
what
think
do you
he made it
think?
impossible for them. He's a young man in a hurry, and he's breaking a lot of China. And I don't think
Yeah,
you were that age. I was that age. You don't compromise back then. We didn't believe in compromise at that age.
we think we're going to live
Of
forever
course
back
we
then,
do.
man.
Of course we do. And right now he thinks he's going to live forever. And I think he believes that compromise is a dirty word in this case because there's an urgency. I mean, he is imbued with the fierce urgency of now, as Barack Obama put it. And he's a true believer. And I don't think they could have found a way to satisfy him and satisfy their own needs, which is why he's out on their own and
Hmm.
probably going to do them more damage than he would have done inside.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I mean when I say that maybe there could have been a more diplomatic way to just kind of a guy like that to me. Um, and I say this having been a guy like that, he could use a mentor or somebody maybe a little older that, oh, I don't want to say could control him, but just maybe give him some guidance on. I mean, because politics, I don't think I would do well at it. It's an acquired skill, and I mean, I get the yeah. He's breaking a lot of
I think
china,
you do a lot better than you think,
so maybe
incidentally. I
I'm
think you do a
sorry.
lot better than you think, incidentally.
I don't know. I someone told me the other day I should run for something locally, and I said, look, the last thing we need is another older person getting into politics. But um, in retrospect, it's something that I wish I had thought about pursuing. But I'd probably be washed up by
I was
now.
supposed to run
So,
back in 1990, and I ultimately backed out because the fundraising was so onerous and so objectionable to me that I couldn't stomach it.
yeah, I mean, Mark, I put it to you this way. I hate asking people to subscribe to my
So do I.
newsletter. So I send out an email every once in a while, or I'll post something, hey, subscribe. And I just am like, boy, it sure would be nice. That actually brings me to a
Yeah.
different point, and I wonder what your thoughts are here. I was doing a live stream a couple of days ago, and the person that I was doing it with, she and uh, I guess about 5 years ago, she started a group called Writers and Editors of Color. And, it is just what it sounds like. At that time, we were all writers on Medium. I had started on
Okay.
Substack. We're talking, just right as, we were in the middle of COVID, I
Yeah.
guess. So everybody's at home, and we would do these, weekly. At that time on Twitter, the live stream things, the audio live that you can do on
Right.
there. And we were talking about how differently Republicans foster their talent. You take a guy like Charlie Kirk. I mean, if you ever really listen to him, he doesn't know a
No,
lot.
he does.
And yet, he's like at the forefront of Republican politics, right? And so we were just talking, and I said, if there were a group called Writers and Editors of Color, in our case, we all happen to be not all progressive, but certainly nobody's on the right, really. And there are Palestinians, Asians in the group, Latinos, both from the U.S. and outside the country. And I said, if there was a group like this that was conservative, oh my goodness, that money'd be coming from every
Yeah, there would
direction
be.
to support us and to make sure we were successful. And our newsletters would not want for um, um, support or any of those any kind of monetary help. And it mystifies me why Democrats don't do the
They
same
don't make the
thing.
kind of money they do.
And I'm not, look, hey, I'd love it for it to be me, but I even look on Substack, and I don't know how much you've looked into it, but there are a couple of folks on Substack that are to the right that have gotten huge support, not only from um, some of the big donors on the right, but even
Yeah.
Substack has done partnerships and this kind of thing. But you just don't see it on our side of the
No.
fence, and I just wonder why that
I think it's
is.
money. I think a lot of Democrats don't make nearly as much as a lot of Republicans. And a lot of the Democrats who do make money aren't on Substack. It's a generalization, I know, but that's my gut.
Mm. I wonder if all this talk about wealthy folks paying more tax, paying their fair share. I mean, there's some wealthy Democrats. Maybe that's not something that they want to elevate too much.
Well, I mean, I know of Democrats who are really objecting to the idea of increased taxes on wealthy. And so you've got a real dichotomy between the wings of the party, where you've got a fundamental tenet of the party, the AOC wing, the Bernie wing, the other people who say you ought to tax billionaires. And a lot of Democratic billionaires just say, hold on, I don't want to pay any more taxes. So you've got a real problem.
That I know you're right, man, but it just, I used to work on Wall Street, so I always joked that I was one of the few people that managed to leave Wall Street and not be stupendously wealthy. but but I worked around Howard Lutnick. So I worked at a firm for about 5 years. It was one of the last places that I worked, and it was as it turned out, like I guess I started there in late 2006. So really right in the middle of the financial crisis. And the company was a black owned, or still is, I guess it's still around. And um, at that time, it was a startup, and one of or the major investor that outside of the guys that own the place was Cantor Fitzgerald,
Yeah.
which Howard Lutnick, of course, was the
Right.
CEO. So my trading floor was one. I mean, we were housed in the building that they were in. We used a lot of their resources, and I was around the guy to some degree. I mean, we weren't friends. He probably um, couldn't pick me out of a crowd, but to hear him now on television, there are guys that used to be on my trading desk, the one that I ran, and we still talk, and we're just like, what is going on with this guy? Some of the things he's saying, it is hard to believe some of the things that he
Oh, yeah.
says. And we know that he came out of the investment world. So and Cantor Fitzgerald essentially is a trading
Yeah.
firm, right? And so when I hear him talk about tariffs in the way that he is, or he does, it's just wow. What's happened to this
Well,
guy?
he drank the Kool-Aid, apparently. The power is an aphrodisiac for a lot of people.
Boy, you talk about drinking the Kool-Aid. That is a phenomenon that I think long after we're gone, people are going to be studying
Oh,
this
yeah.
because a lot of these people used to not be like this, right? I mean, and I'm not saying I particularly ever liked Ted Cruz, but he wasn't like the way he is now. And Marco
Yeah.
Rubio,
Look at that one.
wow. And look, man, I know there's money, but this is beyond money to me. I mean, I think it's like power, I guess. I'm not sure
I
what it
think what
is.
happened was there was an incendiary combination of MAGA and then the match that lit the fire, Donald Trump. And when they combined efforts, the power of MAGA and the people out there in the district and Trump's ability to intimidate turned these people into chicken shits. Because as it came down to it, they looked at it and said, we don't have any political future if we buck these people. And so that's where they are. They've sold their souls in order to stay in power. And if that turns you on, if you're willing to sell your soul to stay in power, nothing we can do about that. But it's really amazing how many people have done it and how many people who Donald Trump insulted are now kissing his ass.
Well, I mean, really, Lindsey
Yeah,
Graham,
look at that one.
for goodness sakes. And I again, these are not people that I necessarily held in high regard, but you just sort of, flash back to Lindsey Graham when Bill Clinton was president and they were ready to run this guy out of town. And look, I'm not defending Bill Clinton. He certainly made his own
Yeah,
mistakes, but what we're looking at now is orders of magnitude worse.
exactly right.
And they No one says a word.
You know, in a few minutes we've got left, I want to talk about something that we both wrote about, and that is for-profit prisons. Um,
Okay.
Give me a few thoughts on what Democrats can do to break this triangle, because the thing that worries me is that the combination of money coming from these for-profit prisons and their executives is managing to keep both Democrats and Republicans on board. And I worry that even if Democrats regain power, nothing will happen.
You know, I think I've actually written a couple of times about this because what I noticed was I'm trying to remember if this was before the election or shortly thereafter. Donald Trump announced that Tom Homan was going to be his
Yep.
border czar. And I looked at Geo Group and a couple of other stocks because, I used to run a trading desk. I traded equities for a long time. So we're sitting here now and I'm looking over my laptop at Bloomberg.
Mm-hmm.
And it just dramatically spiked up. And so it told me exactly what they thought was going to happen. And then you listen to the earnings calls, and they are talking about detainees like widgets, you know, and just the manner. It's pretty offensive, but yeah, I mean, so the expectation we're seeing it play out now,
And we're losing a whole generation of
where
African Americans.
well, and I guess maybe the reason that I keyed in on that is because I'm black and I know, the whole, what has happened in terms of just mass incarceration. And what I predicted, and I don't think it was, it didn't take a rocket scientist to see that, what we may end up with is all of these detainees not necessarily getting deported, but just being converted into slave labor, right? And there are cases we're seeing it happen where the law allows them to farm these people right back out bring them in one door and farm them right back out the next to corporations. We've got, I would imagine, just about every major corporation in some way, shape, or form is using prison labor anyway. And to the extent that we've got, just the agricultural aspect of it, you know, peas have got to get picked by somebody. And I'm reading stories about guys that are working for literally pennies
Yeah.
a day, if not free. I don't know, and this goes right back to our earlier conversation about Democrats listening to consultants and not being able. It, if progressives sort of wield their power, I mean, they got a lot of money, and in Washington that equals
Mm-hmm.
power. Just ask Marjorie Taylor
Oh yeah.
Greene, you know, and that is the only way I see something like what you've raised being dealt with, because and we got to get money out of
Yeah,
politics.
we do.
I don't know how we do it, but we gotta. That is when you all of these issues that we're talking about that don't make sense, when you get right to the to the nub of it, it's money.
The way, yeah.
And I'm
No,
sorry,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say the way out of it is huge Democratic majorities in the House and Senate, a Democratic president, and stack the court. This Supreme Court has to be stacked because otherwise we're doomed.
Don't get me started on
Oh
that,
yeah.
Mark. That is that, and I have to admit, I don't know. I'm not. thoroughly educated on the procedure for expanding the Supreme Court. But man, we had our chance. And
Congress can vote it. The president can sign the bill. There is no number assigned to Supreme Court justices. We've had 7.
right, I knew that much.
Yeah.
I just didn't really know what it
Act of
took.
Congress.
But man, we certainly had a chance, and we just didn't. I think, and I know we got to go. I would just say this last thing. Biden will go down, I think, 10 years, 20 years from now as a great president. But man, he left some stuff on the table. I think Merrick Garland was probably the worst pick he could have made.
Don't get me started on that.
And aside from that, even, I think he thought, and he wasn't by himself, I think he thought, boy, if we can just get back in there and get back to normalcy, everything's going to be okay.
Well, he was naive.
And, well, now we know it wasn't. But, I think we got another chance. Let's hope we do it right.
Let's hope we do it right. Marlon, this has been a pleasure.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. I'm glad we were able to get together.
I'm glad we were too.
It's been a lot of fun.
I'm really appreciative of you for taking the time. I know you've got a lot going on too. I see your stuff every day. Be well, my friend.
All right. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye.